Let's jump right into this explainer and unpack the incredible journey of becoming a corporate director under India's Companies Act 2013. We're going to take a really close look at what it actually means to hold one of the most powerful and, honestly, one of the most precarious positions in the business world.
Think about it for a second. Who really controls a company? You'd probably say the shareholders, right? I mean, they own the place. But to truly understand corporate control, we have to look at the people pulling the operational levers day in and day out. Think of it this way. The shareholders might own the car, but the directors are the ones actually driving it.
So here is our roadmap for today's explainer. First, the role of a director. Then, fiduciary duties and limits. Third, qualifications and appointments. Fourth, board powers and remuneration. And finally, exiting the board. We are covering the complete life cycle of a corporate director.
All right, let's kick things off with Section 1, the role of a director. What does it actually mean to wear this title under Section 234 of the Act?
Under the scheme of the Companies Act, a director essentially wears two very different hats. It's kind of like a balancing act. On one hand, you're an active agent making operational deals and transacting business for the company. But on the other hand, you serve as a protective trustee over the company's assets and properties. So it's a dual role that demands both aggressive business acumen and incredibly careful stewardship.
Now here's a crucial detail. A company cannot simply hire another company or a firm to sit on its board. Section 149 of the Act is crystal clear on this. The law requires a real, breathing human being, an individual, to take on this immense responsibility. Corporate entities can be shareholders, sure, but only individuals can be directors.
Moving right along to Section 2, fiduciary duties and limits. This brings us to the beating heart of corporate governance. And that heart is Section 166. The absolute bottom line here is that your ultimate loyalty isn't to yourself, it's to the company. The law explicitly requires you to act in good faith, promote the objects of the company, and act in the best interest of the stakeholders as a whole. You are legally bound to put the company's well-being way above your own personal ambitions.
And let me tell you, those duties come with some incredibly strict legal liabilities. You've got to follow the company's articles of association, exercise independent judgment, and entirely avoid any conflicts of interest, whether direct or indirect. Oh, and you can't just hand your job over to someone else either. If you try to assign your office, it is completely void. And here is the kicker. If you ever break these rules and make an undue gain, the law mandates that you are personally on the hook to pay every single rupee of that gain right back to the company.
Okay, so how do you actually get the job? That brings us to Section 3, qualifications and appointments. Let's see how someone gets a seat at the boardroom table.
Picture this. You've just been asked to join a prestigious board. Awesome, right? But hold on. Before you can legally say yes, you absolutely must secure a DIN, which is a director identification number. It's a mandatory, unique number given out by the central government. You apply, pay a fee, and honestly, you simply cannot be appointed without it.
Now that you've got your DIN, you're probably wondering what kind of stellar resume you need. Well, surprise! Under the Companies Act, there's a zero qualification rule. The law lays out absolutely no academic, professional, or minimum shareholding requirements. Seriously, the law does not care about your college degree. The barrier to entry is entirely up to the company's own internal rulebook, their articles of association. But while getting in might not require a fancy degree, getting barred from the boardroom is incredibly easy if you trip over any of the strict legal landmines in Section 164. You're immediately disqualified if you're declared of unsound mind, become an undischarged insolvent, or if you get a criminal conviction with 6 or more months of jail time. You're also out if you haven't paid your share calls for 6 months, if you've been convicted of related party offenses in the past 5 years, or even if you're coming from a company that failed to file its financial statements for 3 continuous years.
If you manage to clear all those hurdles, it's time to actually build the board. The Act lays out specific minimums depending on your company type. A public company needs at least 3 directors, a private company needs 2, and a one-person company needs just 1. And whether you're running a massive public enterprise or a mid-sized private firm, the law caps your boardroom at 15 directors initially. Want more than 15? Well, the shareholders have to officially pass a special resolution for that.
So now you're in the seat and the board is formed. Let's look at Section 4, board powers and remuneration. We're talking about the vast powers you hold and exactly how much you can get paid. Being on the board means you and your peers wield the collective authority to literally transform the company's future. It's massive operational power. The board can borrow money, invest funds, grant huge corporate loans, approve critical financial statements, and even authorize total company mergers and takeovers. Now, while the big stuff requires full board resolutions, they can delegate certain financial powers, like borrowing or investing, to specific committees or key managers.
Now for the part everyone cares about, getting paid. But there's a magic number you need to remember under Section 197, and that number is 11%. Total managerial remuneration for a public company, and that includes the managing director and whole-time directors, is strictly capped at 11% of the net profits for the financial year. It's the law's way of ensuring management doesn't just drain the company's coffers at the expense of the shareholders.
So what if you do other work for the company? Well, surprise again, the pay for services rendered in any other capacity usually counts right toward that 11% cap. If a public company wants to exceed that limit, they must get prior approval from the members through an ordinary resolution. The only real exception is if you're providing highly specialized professional services like legal or technical consulting, and the Nomination and Remuneration Committee agrees you are uniquely qualified to do it.
Eventually, all good things come to an end. That brings us to our final part, Section 5, exiting the board. The Companies Act is incredibly specific about how directors make their exit.
To keep things fresh and prevent entrenched, unchecked power in public companies, the law forces 2/3 of the board into a rotating pool. This means that 66.6% of the directors are legally liable to retire by rotation. Only the remaining 1/3 can be structured as permanent or non-retiring directors through the company's articles.
So how does that rotation actually play out? Well, out of that rotating pool we just talked about, 1/3 must officially step down at the annual general meeting. Who goes first? Simply the ones who have been in office the longest. But here is an absolutely amazing detail. If 2 directors joined on the exact same day, they either agree among themselves on who steps down, or they literally draw lots to decide. Just imagine drawing straws for your seat in a corporate boardroom. After that, the company can either reappoint them or fill the vacancy with someone else.
But what if you just want to call it quits yourself? The resignation process under Section 168 is surprisingly straightforward. You give written notice, the board takes note of it, the registrar is intimated, and it gets placed in the next general meeting's report. It's a unilateral move, meaning you don't even need the board to accept your resignation. But a quick warning, the law has a very long memory. Even after you walk away, you remain legally liable for any offenses or issues that happened while you were on watch.
Sometimes, though, leaving isn't exactly your choice. The big takeaway here is the sheer power of the shareholders under Section 169. They hold the inherent right to remove any director before their term even expires, simply by passing an ordinary resolution. And get this, they don't even need to prove mismanagement or fraud. If they just don't like the direction you're taking things, they can vote you out just as easily as they voted you in.
So it's a fascinating balancing act, isn't it? You're an active agent driving the business forward, but also a protective trustee guarding its wealth. You wield ultimate corporate power to shape a company's future, but you're doing it under ruthless legal accountability and the constant watchful eye of the shareholders. Knowing all these strict fiduciary duties and that constant threat of sudden removal, are you ready to take on the power and the peril of the boardroom? Definitely something to think about the next time you see a major corporate board making headlines.